I call this debate to order. Unresolved, America needs the changes President Trump and his administration promise. I'm looking to our first speaker in the affirmative. Jenny, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. In 2009, I gave the opening speech at the first Denver Tea Party at the Capitol and joined the Ron Paul revolution. I was all in with his libertarian principles. When his son, Rand Paul, decided to run for president in 2015, I decided to support him in his candidacy. But during one of the early primary debates, there was one man who came out very strongly in support of parental rights around one issue, and that was vaccination. In fact, Donald Trump was more specifically opposed to mandatory vaccinations than Rand Paul, who had been pretty outspoken about freedom issues in medical care up to that point. And so I was fascinated that this man, who was not really a politician, was speaking very openly about the need to maybe lessen the doses and space them out, and that ultimately we needed parental rights around these important medical issues, and that we needed to have some freedom for parents to decide for themselves what they were going to do with their children. This was music to my ears because I had been vaccine damaged myself as a child and suffered with autoimmune diseases that trip me up every day, even to this day. I have the big 3 side effects: asthma, anaphylaxis, I have food allergies, and the most evil, disgusting disease of all is eczema. There have been times in my life when I have been covered from head to toe in rash because of this disease. These are miserable diseases. And when my own children were coming up, we are the parents of 5 children, we made the difficult decision not to vaccinate because of my problems. I didn't want my children to have to live with a little fanny pack of drugs everywhere they went, carrying an EpiPen and antihistamines out of concern for being exposed to an allergen. So I've been a passionate anti-vaxxer for 35 years and have spoken openly and loudly about this on my blog and other places on the internet. So when President Trump made this a campaign issue, I was really just interested in one topic when I voted in 2016. And it was that parents have the right to choose whether or not to vaccinate their children. And from that day to this, I have supported him wholeheartedly. When he was almost assassinated this past summer, I determined that if he was killed, I was going to support Robert Kennedy Jr. in his campaign because he too was very stridently speaking my language. And I have been so thrilled over the last month to watch the developments on this one issue. Did you all watch the drug company stocks tumble the day that Robert Kennedy Jr. was brought into our government as head of Health and Human Services? I did, and I was cheering loudly. So I'm thrilled with what they're doing. I look forward to lots of transparency and people being brought to account over this hugely divisive issue that has torn families apart and made people lose their jobs because they refuse to get vaccinated. I'm friends with a man named Clifton Duncan, who's a Broadway actor. I'm an actor too. And when I saw that he was canceled from his industry for refusing to get vaccinated, I was incensed. This is a man at the top of his career. He had spent 20 years preparing to be on Broadway. Cast in his first couple of shows was magical in his talent, his singing, his acting. That man was canceled because he refused to get vaccinated. He ended up becoming a dishwasher at a restaurant in his hometown, and he went through a suicidal depression because all of his hopes and dreams had been stolen from him because of vaccine mandates, which roiled the musical theater world particularly harshly. We're still feeling the after effects of that today. So I'm thrilled with what's happened over the last 5 weeks. I look forward to the next 4 years just being more exposure and people who have lied being brought to account.
Thank you, Jenny. That's 4 minutes. We appreciate it. Jazz hands for our first brave speaker. All right. I'm now looking for questions for our speaker, questions of curiosity and clarification for our speaker. If you'd like to ask a question, please go ahead and raise your hand. We'll go to Leslie. Please unmute and ask your question to me.
Hello, Madam Speaker. So I have 2 questions. I guess the first question is if the rights of the previous speaker are respected and she does not have her children vaccinated, how does she propose to protect other children who might catch the infectious diseases that might be transmitted by her unvaccinated children? That's the question.
Thank
How
you
do
for
you provide protection for other children who might catch those diseases? Should it be by isolating unvaccinated children? How do
Thank-
you protect the other children?
Thank you for the question, Leslie. Jenny, do you want to address that?
Sure. My children are all adults now, parents themselves. And ironically, 4 of them and the spouses all chose to get the COVID vaccine. And we have a don't ask, don't tell policy in our family. I don't want to know if my 5 grandchildren have been vaccinated, and they have not told me whether or not my 5 grandchildren have been vaccinated. I want to stand back from the situation and have them have complete stewardship, because as the parents, it's their call, not mine. And I had studied epigenetics and realized that my children are particularly vulnerable to having even worse autoimmune diseases and other side effects than I had based on my health history. So again, I made the difficult decision not to vaccinate, knowing that it would bring a mound of scorn and rejection upon my head. And it did. For 35 years, I've been the outlier, bad mom. I've even been told I should have my children taken away from me and be locked up because I refused to get them vaccinated. So I understand the concerns about quarantine. And when we had a whooping cough epidemic here in Boulder, Colorado, where I live, my son was 2 years old at the time. We happily stayed home when everybody else was getting sick at our church, especially. And my son did come up with symptoms, and I treated him holistically with oregano oil, and he was symptom-free in 5 days.
Thank you, Jenny. All right, let's go to another question from Bryson. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
All right. Sorry, let me get my camera up right quick. There we go. So I guess 2 questions. First, does the speaker think that schools should require vaccines for students going into them? And the second one would be, it sounded like the previous speaker claimed that her conditions were due to vaccines, and I was curious how she knew that was the case.
Okay, thank you for your questions, Jenny.
If you will open the package insert of just about any vaccine and read common side effects, the big 3 are anaphylaxis, eczema, and asthma. I have all 3. So I connected the dots in my own mind. I didn't have to go to a doctor to have them say, oh yeah, this is what caused that. And what was the other question?
Bryson, do you want to repeat it?
Sorry, the
school
other
mandates.
question was if she yes.
Okay. I don't believe vaccines should be mandated in any place. Schools, the military, businesses. I'm nervous about any sort of mandate.
Thank you. All right, let's go to one final question and we'll move on to our next speaker. I'm going to go to Janeth. Do you have a question for our speaker?
You say that you're happy about what's going on, what the administration has done so far. Do you think that what they're doing will help with medical research?
All right, so you say the speaker said
she was happy with what was happening now. She was really happy, and she was hoping that there would be more of the same for the next 4 years. So I'm referring to all of the funding freezes and the staff cuts and things that are causing problems with research and the other agencies that protect us, such as the Food and Drug Administration, etc. Is she happy with how that's been handled?
Jenny, address that how you will, please.
I have been more excited the last 5 years than I've been in my whole life about what we're witnessing in terms of exposure and fraud. There are many of us who believe the FDA, the CDC, and the World Health Organization have been completely overtaken by pharmaceutical money and interests. And so I'm loving the transparency that we're seeing because of DOJ. And I look forward to certain people being brought to account for their lies. Specifically, Dr. Fauci, when he testified before Congress and was asked by Senator Rand Paul, tell us about gain of function. And he just flat out lied. There is proof of this. And so I would point you towards Robert Kennedy Jr.'s book, The Real Dr. Fauci, and open up your eyes. There's just so much fraud. And I look forward to all of it being exposed. We need transparency.
All right, I'm going to assume that you were telling me to open up my eyes, and I will open them nice and wide, and remind folks to please avoid using the second person pronoun you. With that, jazz hands for our brave first speaker and great questions asked and answered. All right, we are going to go to our first speaker in the negative. Again, our resolution tonight is resolved. America needs the changes that President Trump and his administration promise. And our first speaker on the negative side is going to be Deb. Deb, go ahead.
Thank you. So during the final months of the campaign, I did a lot of listening intentionally to Republicans about why they were going to vote for Trump. I really tried to engage with this. And even though some of them said, I don't even like the guy himself, the fellow, but I do want to vote for him. And what I heard was a consistent message from the people I spoke to about kitchen table economics, the need to lower prices for food and household expenses that the Democrats had promised but just not done it. The need to lower food, household expenses, housing, healthcare. And Trump somehow could convince these folks that only he could save them and make their lives better. Yet everything that he has done is leading us immediately to higher prices and a shakier, unpredictable economy. And he's getting involved in tariff wars and cutting important federal services that actually contribute more to citizens in red states than in blue states. He promised to make America safe again, but he immediately started with a pardon and emboldened 1,500 criminals, and many of whom were violent. And he has now most recently aligned our country on the side of Russia against our longest partners and allies. So, instead he's pushing through, instead of helping people and really trying to deal with the issues that are in front of everybody every day, he's pushing through these federal cuts before people can truly understand the very real impact. They're starting to trickle through. People are losing jobs. And as I say, the impacts are being felt across the country and in many, many red states. And he's also now being very clear that he is doing this so that he can find more money to give billionaires tax breaks. And I just don't think that even plays with what the Republicans thought they were getting when they voted for him. Thanks.
Thank you, Deb, for sharing your perspective with us. Jazz hands for our speaker. All right, looking for questions. If you have a question for the speaker, go ahead and raise your hand. Let's go to Anthony. Please unmute and remember to ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The previous speaker stated that in terms of kitchen table economics, the impact of actions that Trump has taken so far have already, I believe, if I'm not misstating it, already resulted in higher prices to households. I'm wondering upon what basis has that evidence been seen, and why is it soon enough to determine that those actions have resulted in higher prices for the average household? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Deb?
Thank you. I think that certainly everything that we hear in terms of as soon as you have tariffs, you're going to pay more for things. And I'm also referring to the fact that a number of the cuts, job cuts and funding cuts, have cut livelihoods of people. And for example, the US aid that has been severely cut, it's put on hold right now, but it's already impacting farmers and saying, wait a minute, we're counting on that. So that is already impacting people's daily lives and livelihoods, and in most cases in red states. So that's what I was referring to. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Let's go to another question. Constance, unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm unsure how to completely frame this question, but I guess it's based on the previous speaker and the first speaker. I wonder how single issue voting affects the problems in our country or the solutions. I was concerned about, and I guess wanted to ask the first speaker about that, because so much else is affected. And I guess the second speaker, how can we move forward with the president we have now to open it up so that the issues that people feel so strongly about and vote single issue can broaden, and we can you know, really benefit the whole country. I hope that's clear enough question.
Thank you, Constance. That's a great question. Deb?
Constance, if I knew the answer to that, you know, I'll tell you. We were asked to talk about, really try to keep it to a single issue. I could have come up with probably 5 different things that are on my mind right now, but I really, the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because I had those conversations intentionally before before Election Day, and now I'm seeing those same folks going, wait a minute, what do you mean? Why is this happening? And I gotta believe that maybe my hope is that the way that this is going to get turned around is that when people who voted for him for things that they're now seeing are not happening and the opposite is happening, that they can say, wait a minute, we've been lied to, and we need to stand up for our rights.
Thank you, Deb. Let's take one more question. We're going to go to Jane. Unmute and ask your question to me, please.
Hi. I was wondering something that former speaker said about U.S. aid affecting farmers, and I have a lot of farmers in my family. I was just curious how the cuts to U.S. aid would affect American farmers, because I thought that the U.S. aid was more like helping countries besides the U.S. Thank you.
Great question, Jane. Deb?
Yes, excuse me. It is my understanding, I'm pretty clear on this, that some of the support programs for USAID are sending things that are produced here, crops, grains, etc., by US farms overseas. Those orders are now cut off.
All right. With that, thank you to our second brave speaker, Jazz Hands for speaker, and for great questions asked and answered again. All right, it's gone in the chat again, and I'm going to shout it out. We have some folks chatting whips to let us know they're interested in speaking, but if that's you, please do chat to your whip. We want to get as many voices in as possible this evening. For now, we are going to go to our next affirmative speech, and that is going to be Robert. Robert, you have 4 minutes.
Good evening, Braver Angels. So the main point of my speech is that people resist change, whether it's good or bad. A subpoint to that is that they resist it even more based on who's driving the change. In this case, President Trump. I summed up Trump's first term with 6 words: love his actions, hate his words. Many are angrily protesting simply because they hate Trump. No president does everything right, and this administration will be no different, especially with this pace of disruption that's currently happening. America is split 50-50, unfortunately, so regardless of whether you lean blue or red, the people on the other side feel just as passionately about their political positions as you do about yours. So we do have to come together. We're all Americans. So for me, there were three major reasons that drove the voting in this election: immigration, inflation, and government spending. As far as immigration goes, more than 10 million people were detained at American southern borders from 2021 to 2024. Another 400,000 came south from Canada. This doesn't include what they term as gotaways that were never caught. 107,000 people died from drug overdoses in 2023 with an open border with drugs flowing in. 300,000 unaccompanied minors are missing that have been sent into the interior of our country. A drug dose can only be taken once and sold once. A child can be sold, in many cases for sex, for hundreds or thousands of interactions. This has bankrolled the cartels. It's true, the Democrats sponsored a bill to stem the tide of immigration in June of 2024, but only after their pollsters told them they were losing votes. Voters saw through it and asked, where has the Biden administration been the last 3.5 years? So we've sent $173 billion so far to Ukraine, a country 6,000 miles away, to restore its border when we wouldn't spend $10 billion to secure our own border. The second point is inflation. Inflation in 2020 was 1.3%. It increased 20% from 2020 to 2024. Few people got raises big enough to cover that. The deficit increased by $1.8 trillion in the fiscal year October 23 to September 24, the government's year. That's the same amount as Biden's $1.8 trillion Jobs and Families Act, only 22% of which was actually infrastructure spending. The rest was more social giveaways. The third point, government spending, the most contentious issue right now. Our deficit currently stands at $36.5 trillion, going up $10,000 a second. That's $107,000 per man, woman, and child in this country. Deep down, all voters know this is unsustainable. All legitimate organizations, profit or nonprofit, do annual audits. I review what's called a Form 990 for every charity I donate to. It's like our 1040 tax form. If the charity doesn't publish one, I don't donate. People are protesting about auditing government agencies before they even know the outcomes, simply because it's the Trump administration. It's odd that people resist finding out where their own money is being spent. The General Accounting Office, a few weeks ago, published a report stating that immediate action is needed now on the federal government deficit. The federal government, and I quote, the federal government loses between $233 billion and $521 billion annually to fraud. As for job cuts, they're unfortunate, but necessary. I was a part of 3 reorganizations, including 100,000 job cuts at Bank of America during the financial crisis. That was 1 in 3 people. No fun, but sometimes things have to be cut when you're overspending. Finally, many complain that Elon Musk is unelected. Well, as referenced earlier, Dr. Fauci, who helped orchestrate rescinding some core American values, was not elected either. So in closing, I'll repeat, sudden change is hard, but we can have a small fender bender accident now or a 30-car pileup down the road. We owe it to our children to act. So make your choices. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Robert. I'm again going to remind folks to please avoid using you. I will make my choices. All right. We're going to go to questions now. Let's go to a first question from Joe. Joe, do you want to unmute and ask your question to me?
Is he on mute?
I'm not sure where they
My apologies, my apologies. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I had a question for the speaker about inflation. I think we have all been impacted by this. I think we've all felt the pain. One of the things that I have noted, though, in reading the news over the last few years is that, incredibly, the United States rate of inflation has been dramatically lower than that of any other nation. I was wondering if the speaker could address this and make suggestions on what could have been done, if anything, or how he would respond to the fact that this seems to be something impacting the whole world and not just one country or one administration. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great question. Robert?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, I think we've heard many times that America is the best house in a bad neighborhood. Saying that everyone was terrible and we were the least terrible, I don't consider that a great win. I think we certainly had to print some money during the COVID pandemic. We printed 20% of all the currency that's ever been put in circulation since 1913. The 1.8 trillion spending that occurred after that, other spending that occurred was totally unnecessary. And that just added, fuel to the fire. So maybe ours was lower than other countries. Still 9.2% in 2021, not good. So, so other people are worse. I don't consider that a win.
Thank you. All right, another question for the speaker. Let's go to Doug Smith. Unmute and ask your question to me.
I think he's at Doug, you're on mute.
He's working on it. Doug, why don't you keep working on that? And we'll
I'm unmuted, aren't I?
go for it. We can hear you now.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I agree with many of the issues of concern that the speaker mentioned, but I would like to ask the speaker how he feels or what he thinks should be done that the president is achieving this through unconstitutional acts, that is violating the Constitution rather than going through the normal process. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's not okay. What he's doing, a lot of it is good. Some of it is very bad and being wrongly done. I think the government, just like what I referenced, the 5 trillion of money printed in 2020 and 2021, the government is kind of a clunky instrument. It's so big. So again, agree with cuts need to be made. I don't agree with the way he's doing it and all the things that he's doing.
Thank you, Robert. All right, let's go to one final question. I see lots of hands. We're going to try to get in as many quotes as we can tonight, but we do have to keep going. For this last question, we're going to go to Rob. Rob, can you unmute and ask your question to me? Rob, you seem to be unmuted, but we can't hear you. I'm gonna go ahead and undo what I just said, if it's okay with our other Robert here, and take 2 more questions. We'll come back to Rob Lee, and we'll take another question here from Jean. Jean, do you want to unmute and ask your question to me? Let's keep it brief, please.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm concerned about the speakers talking about the deficit problem and wonder how the speaker feels about a tax cut for the very wealthy.
Thank you, Jean. Great question. Robert?
Yeah, again, I think you have to look at the realities and do your own research. Don't listen to anything I say. Here's the issue, and I got so tired of the media parroting that the tax cuts were for the rich and everything. So look at IRS tables. Don't take my word for it. 86% of the taxes the government collects are paid by the top 10% of wage earners. The bottom 40% of wage earners pay little or no tax. So if you give tax cuts, you're most naturally going to have to give them to the people who pay the most taxes. So that would be my answer to that, unless you have something more specific.
I'll take that as a general use, since I, believe it or not, do not have the power to cut taxes. Thank you for that, Robert. And we will go to our final question. Rob, let's see if we can hear you now.
Hopefully you can hear me now. Did I fix it?
Perfect. Yeah, go
Excellent.
ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The speaker talked about or made allusions to our country being a business and talked about, times when businesses have to make difficult decisions and hire and fire people. I'm wondering how the speaker resolves the differences in a country from a business where you don't get to select your citizens. They just live here. They got born here or however they got here, and they're the citizens of this country. So you can't evaluate people and situations in the same attitude you would when everybody needs to bring value and earning potential for the corporation. Our nation isn't a corporation. It's here for all of us. And not all of us are able to contribute at a high level and to be able to stoke the economy and provide all the things. And we need to make arrangements for all of that, which is unique. Companies don't have to do that. So I wonder how the speaker feels about the execution of the layoffs and the reduction in force in our government and the way that it's been done, because it's just not right. I mean, these people that are serving our country, in my opinion, and I think they deserve better.
All right. Thank you for your question, Rob. Robert, do you care to respond?
Yeah, Rob, great name. So yeah, again, the way some of it's being handled, I don't agree with. I agree with you 100%. It's not that we're a corporation, Rob, but the point is, at some point, our currency is going to be massively devalued. Yes, everyone shouldn't be evaluated like they're a business or whatever. How much ROI or return on investment are you bringing us? But the fact is, we're $36.5 trillion in debt, and at some point, there's going to be a massive devaluation of our currency. It's going to hurt your savings, it's going to hurt your retirement. More importantly, it's going to hurt our children's. If you don't think it can happen, it's happened in Greece during the financial crisis, happened in Cyprus, happened in Venezuela. Just take a look at those countries. You can't just print endlessly. So I'm not saying everybody has to produce twice what they generate in profits. That's not it. But when you have massive debts, you have to think about how to address those. You can't just keep going down the same road. So that would be my point. I think that's where it'd be a little different look than what you're talking about.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you to our
Thanks for the question.
And for taking a couple extra questions there, and to all of our questioners, jazz hands. Thanks, folks. All right, moving right along, we are going to a speech in the negative now, and we're going to go to MD. MD, are you in the room? And would you?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. You have 4 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I would like to talk about Doge. So I believe that the most dangerous development on the domestic front is the dismantling of federal government agencies by an unelected and unqualified group of youngsters led by the richest person on the planet, Elon Musk, under the name of Doge, Department of Government Efficiency, not a real department since it was not created by Congress. I've never met anybody who is against government efficiency, but what Musk is doing is literally the same approach that he took after he bought Twitter. So this led to a huge loss of value of Twitter, which didn't affect him because he didn't buy Twitter for its value, but using the same approach on the federal government is even more risky, since we can live without Twitter, but the destruction of federal government means anarchy, not freedom. There's a reason why nobody else in the industry takes Musk's strategy to become more efficient. It doesn't make things more efficient, it destroys value. I'm surprised about America's tendency to look only at the cost of government and not at the value provided by the government services. Also, there's a cost of not having certain government services. Imagine not having institutions that enforce regulations about clean water, clean air, and food safety. Yes, people may save a couple of bucks in taxes, but they pay with their families' health or even life. An example that hits close to home for me, I'm a scientist and a small biotech AI business owner. The cuts to NIH and NSF slow down research into diseases like cancer, slow down scientific discoveries and the development of new treatments. Basic science needs to be publicly funded since it does not immediately generate profit, but it generates the new knowledge that provides the raw material, the gold nuggets, if you will, that companies need to create novel products that benefit humanity. I urge Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike to defend our governmental institutions and lobby for true efficiency, improvement by having a team of experts analyzing the services current institutions provide, the direct and indirect benefits of these services for the American people, and opportunities to provide these services at a lower cost. There are lots of other topics that I think are worrisome in the current administration, but I believe that DOGE is the greatest threat to the American society at this time, so I chose to concentrate on this. Thank you.
Thank you, MD. All right, we are going to go ahead and take questions for this speaker. I'm going to try and get in some voices we haven't heard from yet. So if you have a question, please do go ahead and raise your hand. For our first question, we're going to go to Joshua. Do you want to unmute and ask your question to me, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. The previous speaker had made the comment about Twitter and the idea that that was a model. And I guess my question is, with what was accomplished there, was that a successful model or an unsuccessful model? Does the speaker feel?
All right. Does the speaker care to respond?
Yes, so I think it's a very unsuccessful model if you talk about efficiency. Now, I believe the reasons why Elon Musk bought Twitter was not for the monetary value, so it's not exactly comparable. But if his goal was to increase monetary value of Twitter, that was not achieved. Twitter is now less valuable than it was when he bought it, and before he did those cuts. And now just randomly cutting government without any knowledge is extremely risky. It's kind of like you have a plane that's flying and you're just like randomly pulling out cables or screws to make it lighter, and not knowing what is essential and what is not. And having a destruction of government would just make our society collapse, and I'm very fearful of that.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Let's go ahead and take another question for this speaker. We're going to go to Allison. Can you unmute and ask your question to me?
Hey there, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay, great. I was just wondering if the speaker would elaborate a little bit more on the effect that Elon Musk may be having on our international dealings as well, as far as some of the things that he has seemingly supported in Germany and this sort of thing, because I do believe that there are some issues that affect us on the national level, but it extends internationally as well. And I was wondering if the speaker might elaborate a little bit on that, if that's within her bailiwick. Thank you.
For the question. To our speaker. I think you're muted. Does our speaker care to unmute and respond to the question?
Sorry, so I believe I'm unmuted now.
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so Elon Musk tried to meddle with the recent German election. So Germany had an election on Sunday where the extreme right or neo-Nazi party was the second strongest party, and he strongly tried to intervene in the election and supported the neo-Nazi party. So I think this is very worrisome. I don't think people should throw their money and power into foreign elections. So that's a worry as well. As I said, there's a lot of other worries that I have, but I do believe that DOGE could lead to societal collapse here in the United States, and that therefore this is my priority.
Thank you. Jazz hands for our speaker. We're going to cut questions there so that we can keep getting voices in. Definitely room for a few more speakers. So if you're still interested in speaking, now's the time to chat to your whip. For now, we are going to go back to a speech in the affirmative, and I'm looking for Jeff Decker. Jeff, do you care to unmute? You have 4 minutes.
We are unmuted. Okay. First of all, I appreciate that Bravery Angels is a big organization that allows us to participate. And I think that big picture is what we're really talking about today, or addressing in life, just as in business. And our government, particularly our federal government, is in fact a business. That we have different talents and different perceptions and education, experience, abilities, and basically what that does is creates different roles for different people. And it doesn't make anybody superior or inferior, it just means we're different. So as we look at the big picture, the vision is the vision that's mandatory from the CEO of the corporation or of a business. And in our case, our president is the head of the executive branch, which basically makes him the CEO of our country. And as a CEO, he has to deal with what's happening. And if, in fact, we have, I use the term inertia, which is basically a physics term, but it's effective in life. And some people will say momentum, but momentum is certainly not as important a word as inertia. So to address negative inertia, you need to really hit the brakes and stop whatever you're doing and change direction, which you don't do on a dime. And the bigger the issue, then the bigger and heavier foot you got to have on the brake. And if we look at $36 trillion in debt and millions of illegal immigrants, issues such as this, then you obviously have some very big negative inertia that has to be dealt with. And you have a need which, as a big picture person, you address the overall function. Now, as our government works, the Congress makes the laws and the executive branch basically administers them. So in this case, we have kind of an unusual circumstance where in order to take action, which is kind of unique, we have a new president who ran on certain principles and he's doing what he said he was going to do. And he's doing it by executive action or executive orders because that's the most expedient way to do it. What ends up happening is you cut an overall program, and then people with special interest in any portion of that program are going to have issues. And given Congress makes laws, what you end up with is Congress now becomes responsible for legislation that will either incorporate executive orders into laws or to modify them, to restructure, whatever. And with the big issues that we have, restructuring is really a very important thing. So I think what is happening to some degree is we're, with executive orders, we're forcing Congress to do what they should have done all along, which is the day they're elected, they should check their partisanship at the door and walk in and work together with synergy to address the issues of the American people. Because once you're elected, you've got a forum.
Come to your last sentence here.
I can go to a last sentence. I guess a thought is that in America, we want to be mentors to the world at times. And do we want to be mentors by sending money, or do we want to be mentors by having a society that someone else would want to emulate?
Thank you. Jazz hands for our speaker. All right. Looking for a couple of questions. let's first go to Laura. You want to unmute and ask your question to me?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Speaker. I think what I'm hearing mostly from the negative and from mainstream media is how much damage that these cuts are going to do to the organizations that on face seem to be doing all this great work, but there's very little mention of the corruption that is being revealed with these investigations. There is little accountability. There is little.
Do you have a question for the speaker?
Okay, the question is, how would you do it otherwise if the corruption is masking all of this? How could you do it otherwise but just going within and revealing this through these kind of actions?
Okay, so it sounds like the question is, how would the speaker do things differently?
How could you do it otherwise? I mean, how could it be done otherwise? And he might just say he doesn't think it could be. I don't know.
All right, Jeff, do you care to respond?
Yeah, I don't know that it can be done otherwise. Just going from my own experience in the business community and what's been successful is you have a big issue, you hit the brakes on it, and then the people that are involved that are those who specifically have that particular area of expertise come back to you, and maybe you have 12 components and they say, well, component 1, 7, 11, and 13 or 12 should stay. And they fight for those and you reinstate some. And that's what I think will happen over time, is that with legislation that the things that need to continue will be pointed out and cleaned up.
Great, thank you. And a final question for our speaker from Jamie. Will you unmute and ask your question to me, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, well, let me frame it by saying, I too used to believe that the country should be run like a business many years ago. And then having been in business for a long time, I realized that business has profit centers, right? They have budgets, they have profit centers, they have measurable outcomes, and they have revenue streams. And the federal government is not, you cannot measure things like national security. How do you measure the number of attacks that don't happen on our soil? How do you measure things that are protecting the general public without, there is no profit to that as a profit margin. So I asked the speaker, how do you justify equating the federal government to a business when it isn't a business?
How does the speaker justify equating the government to a business? Jeff, do you care to respond?
Yeah, I guess I would differ in the standpoint that I believe that government is a business. It's not a corporation, certainly, so it's not a for-profit, which a corporation would be. But you take X amount of money in, you take X amount of money out, and at some point you need to balance the budget. So when you have all of the issues you're dealing with, you need to settle on the priorities that are necessary. And ones you're talking about, if they're higher priorities, then that's where you put the money to handle the issues.
Thank you to our speaker and our questioners. Great questions asked and answered. We're going to keep moving so we can get more voices in. I'm going to remind folks one more time that the only you in the room tonight is me, and I seem awful busy. I think I've devalued the currency, balanced the budget. There's a lot going on here, so please refrain from addressing other folks by you or by name, using he, she, they, the speaker, the lady who spoke before me, whatever it is that is not you. All right, now we are going to move to a speech in the negative. Bryson, you have 4 minutes.
Okay, sorry, let me get my, all right, there we go. So there are a few different things that I want to talk about, two main points, and then we might go off on a few tangents. We'll see. The first thing I sort of wanted to talk about was Trump's foreign policy. Starting with the Ukraine, I think that his handling of that situation, to be quite honest, is completely baffling. He excluded the Ukraine from the peace talks of the war in Ukraine. So he has continually sided with Putin. He's used Russian talking points. He even accused Ukraine of being the one that started the war, which is an interesting perspective to take, I guess. His handling of our allies isn't much better. Placing tariffs on Canada and Mexico, who are supposed to be our strongest trade partners, probably will not go far insofar as we need our allies in order to have a strong perspective on the global stage. Putting aside the fact that tariffs have been shown to move costs to the American citizens and the fact that they have been broadly denounced by any economist worth their salt, it's even more baffling due to the fact that the tariffs that he placed on Canada and Mexico are less than the tariffs that he raised on China. There's also his handling of the situation in Gaza and Israel, claiming that the United States is going to be taking Gaza. Aside from the logistical issue of removing 2 million people, I believe that's the number, there's also the issue of how exactly he's going to go about taking that without putting our troops on the ground, something he said that he wouldn't do. And there's also the issues as far as the cost in terms of rebuilding it. The other thing I wanted to talk about was Doge and the general misinformation coming out of it. I'm not going to deny that there are places where the funding can probably be better spent, or that there's possible corruption or misallocation of funds or anything like that. But it does seem like there's an incredible amount of misinformation coming specifically from Doge and the MAGA movement's efforts to just slander, I guess would be the word, the federal government. Just to name a few, there was a quote that came out of Doge not too long ago saying that $7 million of the US tax dollar had been spent on magic. But if you actually look where these funds went, about 6 million of that went to a children's natural history museum in a town called Magic. It was nicknamed Magic City or something like that. Now, saying $6 million spent on a children's natural history museum doesn't have the same gut punch as $7 million spent on magic. There's other examples, a couple $1 million spent on a toilet that like maps the print of your butt. But if you actually look at the study for that, what it was trying to do was it was trying to use toilets to detect early warning signs for cancer. Once again, doesn't have the same gut punch. There's a lot of different examples of this, and it's sort of disheartening to hear all of these quotes coming out and people just not fact checking any of these numbers, because the general rule of thumb is that if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. There's also other areas of misinformation. Trump has brought in people like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard. RFK spreading vaccine conspiracy theories and misinformation, and Tulsi Gabbard spreading Russian talking points. So those are the main 2 points, but there's a few other things I guess I can mention since I have time. Donald Trump pardoned 1,600 January 6 rioters, 169 of which were pled guilty to assaulting police officers. It is baffling. I voted for Trump in 2020. I grew up Republican, and it is baffling to me to see the party that I grew up with supporting policies and supporting a candidate that would pardon people who assault police. Sorry, is that time for me?
Yep, thank you.
right,
That
thank you.
is time. All right, jazz hands for our speaker. Do we have questions for the speaker? Go ahead and raise your Zoom hand if you have a question. Any questions for the speaker? Let's go to a question from Fletcher. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, I was wondering if the speaker, while he has a long and appropriate list, I think, he did not mention the recent news relative to the president's approach in dealing with the mineral rights. My personal view is that this is blood money, that we're taking an ally and putting them under the bus. Would he comment on it, please?
Thank you. Bryson?
I'm afraid that I can't comment too deeply on that. I haven't been keeping up with the news probably as much as I should have recently, so I'm not super intimately familiar with that particular example that you bring. But yeah, it sounds pretty bad. So I'll do my research on it afterwards.
No worries at all.
Madam Chair,
Thank
could
you,
I just could I add a comment?
We're not going to take a follow-up here because we want to keep getting voices in, but I appreciate it. And thank you to our speaker. I will smile upon further admissions of uncertainty as we continue. That is a perfectly acceptable answer. All right, let's go to another question here from Hillary. Can you unmute and ask your question to me?
Yes, thank you. I was going to ask a question about mineral rights also, and so I'll pivot and ask, I'm curious as to what led you or what, why you voted, oh, sorry, no use. Why the speaker chose to vote for Trump in 2020?
Great question.
So, yeah, great question. So I'm from Texas. We have a very strong, very vocal Republican population. My family is Republican, very, very pro-Trump. And I grew up listening to a lot of the right-wing sort of pundits, you know, the Ben Shapiro's and the Steven Crowders and the things like that. And I wouldn't say that my first major disagreement with the MAGA branch of the Republican movement came until COVID happened. The theories that I heard coming out of the anti-vax side of things were out there. I personally knew a man that argued to me that the government was going to use vaccines to artificially alter our brain chemistry to control our actions, which I know doesn't reflect the vast majority of even anti-vaxxers, but that just, I think, gets the general sentiment across. January 6th was another major dividing point for me. I thought that Trump massively mishandled it. I didn't know to what extent at that point. Then after that, it wasn't until I heard about the false electors plot that Trump tried to institute on January 6th that I really started putting everything that he did under a much finer microscope. So before that, I sort of listened to the pundits. I found any article to support my claims, and that's just sort of what I went with. So that's why I voted for Trump in 2020.
Thank you for sharing that, Bryson. All right, we are going to keep moving. I know we have lots of questioners. We also have lots of folks lined up to speak, and we're going to try and get in as many different perspectives as we can this evening. We are going back to a speech in the affirmative. We are going to go down to 3 minutes. So speakers moving forward have 3 minutes, unless we move to 2, but for now you have 3 minutes. And our next speaker is going to be McCall, and excuse me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Last name is Snare. Please do correct me if I pronounced it incorrectly.
Yeah, it's Michael Snare. Can you hear me? Great. So I may be in the wrong slot here. I responded to the whip's question, saying that I agree with, some of the intentions of, the things that Trump ran on, the focus on China, the need to crack down on, criminal aliens in particular, and I applaud the fact that, he's doubled the arrest rate over what Biden was doing on, putting illegal, immigrants who are criminals, getting them off the street. But I'm not a fan at all of what he's doing. DOGE is political theater. And it's obvious. You can't make any intelligent decision about someone's value as an employee based on a 5-bullet snapshot of 1 week. It's just not possible. The claims that they made of fraud and waste uncovered are completely untrue. If you look at it, they will find some, and there is fraud out there, but they haven't found any yet. And they're not going at it the way they are going at it. It's useless. Trump is walking away from also our ability to influence what goes on in the world. Embracing Putin, for example. Russia is our number 2 enemy. They are not our friends. They interfere in our elections. They hack our infrastructure. They celebrate cyber criminals who steal money online from Americans. Walking away from Ukraine is going to completely undermine our credibility as an ally. You know, the world's kind of a bar fight, and we may be the baddest dude in the bar, but we benefit from having some people, you know, who watch our backs and help us. USAID delivers great value in terms of the appreciation that the world sees for what America does to help other people. When we walk away from the World Health Organization and various things like this, those organizations continue to do work that has an impact on the world. And we're ceding we're giving up our ability to influence what those institutions do and basically turning control of those institutions over to the Chinese. And we're doing it for, you know, well, because we think the Chinese have influence in them, and they do, but we're losing our influence there. It's just terrible. The extreme partisanship of what he's doing, you know, the appointments of Gates, Gabbard, Hegseth, you know, people who are obviously completely incompetent and unqualified for their jobs, firing the inspectors general, the censorship that says that no employee of the federal government can say or write anything that Trump doesn't agree with. I mean,
You come to your last sentence, Michael.
yeah, is that a good thing to do? That's what I'm looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. Jazz hands for our speaker. All right, we'll go ahead and take a couple of questions. Anyone with questions for our speaker, please go ahead and raise your Zoom hand. See if we can get a couple of new voices in for questions. Anyone? All right, let's go to Diana for our first question. Please unmute and ask your question to me.
Madam Chair, thank you. I noticed that there was a reference to illegal criminal aliens. I did a little research, and it appears that you're only guilty of a misdemeanor if you enter the country illegally one time. And of course, many people re-enter and re-enter and re-enter, at which point it becomes a much more serious issue. I'm just wondering, do all of our speakers know that that is true? And how do we define what is a criminal alien? And do we actually know what the illegal population consists of? Because I grew up in the Central Valley, where a lot of agricultural workers may or may not have entered legally, but they're not out there robbing trains. They're working, and I do not have the big picture of what the population consists of. But I'm just, what is kind of your reaction when you hear the term illegal criminal alien? What does that mean to you, or to any of us?
Thank you for your question. It sounds like you want to know what the term illegal alien means to the speaker. Go ahead, Michael, and address that how you will.
Well, I'm talking about illegal criminals. I'm talking about not just people who maybe have crossed the border undocumented. I'm talking may have claimed asylum, which is not illegal, by the way. I'm talking about the people who are committing robberies and, you know, violent crimes and, you know, rapes and murders and, you know, the whole gamut of stuff that we lock, you know, American citizens up for. I think we're doing, you know, Trump is doing a better job, apparently, of, you know, he's almost doubled the number of people who've been arrested for that kind of thing. And I think that's a good thing.
All right, thank you. Let's go to one more question for our speaker. We're going to go to Davis. Can you unmute and ask your question to me, please?
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the previous speaker. I would like to, there's been quite a bit of mention of the increase in arrests made of illegal immigrants, and it's my understanding that while the amount of arrests has gone up, the amount of false arrests of American citizens and people who are here legally but may not be citizens has gone drastically up, while the arrest of violent criminals among illegal immigrants has actually gone down. At least in the first month, we're still in early days. So I guess I would like to ask the speaker whether that makes a difference of it while we are arresting more people. Does it make a difference that we have many more false arrests happening?
Thank you for the question, Michael.
Yeah, of course it does. False arrests, the type of thing you're talking about, arresting American citizens who, because somebody mistakenly thinks they're here illegally, and the kind of thing is terrible. I'm talking about, you know, the arrests of people who are actually committing crimes that, you know, we would arrest and lock up an American citizen for, and they're doing a better job of that. I think that's good. I'm pro-immigrant. I think the idea of mass deportations is going to devastate multiple industries in this country if we do it. And I think, and I know for a fact that most of the people who are here, quote unquote, illegally are here to work and support a family, and they're law abiding, and they're doing important things, and they're paying taxes. I'm very pro-immigrant. I was just wanted to highlight, you know, some of the things that I think the people on the right, you know, and I agree on, which is we do need to do a better job of locking up the people who are really criminals.
Thank you, Michael. All right, jazz hands for our speaker and our questioners. Great job, folks. All right, we're going to move right along. We're going back to the negative side of the resolution, and our next speaker is going to be Janeth. Janeth, do you want to unmute? You have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to speak to the rule of law and how it's being treated by the Trump administration. I think there have been several instances where they have been told by a court to stop doing something, but have continued to do it one way or another. And I believe that Vice President Vance has said something to the effect that, you know, courts cannot overrule the president in what he's doing. And the president has also said, if you're saving your country, nothing is against the law. And I'm very concerned about that because the law is our last defense against lawlessness, which is some of what is happening at the moment. I'm also very concerned about what happened to the various inspector generals and also in the military, where all of the JAG officers have been removed. These are the officers that tell our military men whether something is legal or illegal under the law, under military law. And if Trump has gotten rid of all of these and can fill them with whoever he chooses, then they're going to never overrule what he says. Everything he tells the military is going to be called legal. There's not going to be an illegal order anymore. And I'm significantly worried about that as well. So I think that the fact that nobody is above the law is something that we really have to consider here. And if, in fact, Trump is not going to follow the courts, that is a real problem for me. And that's what I have to say, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Janeth. Jazz hands for our speaker. All right, we're looking for questions for the speaker. I'm going to take 2. Let's try to keep them brief so we can keep getting to more speeches. Got a little bit of time left here. All right, raise your hand if you have a question. For our first question, we'll go to Joshua. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me, please.
Thank you. And Janeth, with what you're talking about with lawlessness and absolute, I guess being a person of history, where in your past have you ever seen the absolute rule? I mean, kings and dynasties and emperors have always had pushback, even with all they've tried to do. So I guess my question is, where do you believe that even if he instilled all this, there wouldn't be people that would still stand up in those positions?
Okay, where does the speaker believe there's absolute rule? Go ahead.
I think in Nazi Germany, there was absolute rule.
Thank you, Janet. And thank you to our questioner. We'll take one more question. Anne, go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me, please.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I was wondering if our last speaker concerning the firing of the JAG officers in the military, if she thinks it might have to do with the new DEI policies that are doing away with the DEI policies, and the fact that perhaps these lawyers would not conform.
Thank you, Anne, for the question. Janet?
It's my understanding that they are primarily there to give advice to military officers and others concerning the legality of their actions. They, I don't believe that the main JAG officers have anything to do with DEI. I may be wrong about that, but it's my understanding that that is the case.
All right. Thank you, Jazz Hands, for great questions asked and answered, and for our speaker. Great speech. All right. We're going to keep moving here. We'll go for another round of 3-minute speeches, going back to the affirmative. Next on my list is Alex. Alex, unmute. You have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So
I agree with the, sorry, how's that?
Go ahead. There were 2 of you in the room, and there was a little bit of confusion, but you are good, Alex W., to proceed.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So broadly, I agree with the push for competence, efficiency, and honesty in government institutions. And I don't think of policies in terms of good and bad, but in terms of more constructive and less constructive. I'm always looking for ways that they can be improved to address people's concerns. Political conversations become productive when we examine what we really want and suspend our assumptions about how to accomplish it. So we can modify things to address purposes that everyone can support without causing the problems that people are concerned about. And for example, I looked up something called the SAVE Act, which is a bill, not an executive order, but people were mentioning it in this context of Republican policies. And I heard people say that it would prevent people who had changed their names from voting because they wouldn't match the birth certificate. And it may have since been modified since I heard that, but I did look it up and I saw that it included Real ID as an acceptable documentation, which by now I would hope most people have one of those already. So that should solve the problem. And I was listening to the underlying concern. We want everyone eligible to be able to vote. And people were trying to accomplish that by lowering standards for identification or preventing them from being made more strict. And that is one way to do that. But we could also instead accomplish making sure everyone can register to vote who's eligible by taking measures to make sure that everyone has access to proper ID documents, because those are necessary for many other activities besides voting. So when we look at these opportunities for accomplishing what we want without also imposing drawbacks on other people, that's when we find those shared criteria for success. And that's when we find that common ground that we can build on. So I like that we're criticizing the policies and looking at how we could modify them to work better without harming people in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. All right, looking for a couple of questions for our speaker. Let's first go to Bethany. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me.
Hi there. I'm just tapping in on the having the appropriate identification. And my personal experience, I live in Texas and I've been in the state for almost 40 years. And just my last driver's license renewal, it was time for me to go in and get my picture taken and all that. And I was required to have an official birth certificate. I was required to bring in an official birth certificate, which I was born in the state of Indiana, and I had to contact the state and get this. Anyway, it ended up taking months for me to be able to renew my driver's license. And I couldn't see it any other way except a voter suppression situation, because it was so difficult for me to get it. So I mean, yes, I agree with you as far as that, but how do you see?
How does the speaker see?
How does the yes, I'm sorry. How does the speaker see obtaining identification as being as it should?
I may not have made that sufficiently clear. So many people see that in order to make it easier for people to register to vote, people should be we shouldn't require people to provide as much documentation. I would look at it as we should make it a lot easier for people to have access to that documentation. We should make sure that everyone can get their birth certificate much more easily, and then that solves both problems. People can have their IDs secured while also being able to do so easily. So that would be an angle that I would investigate. So I hope that clarifies.
Guys, hands for a great question, great response. All right, we'll take one more. Let's try to keep it brief. We're gonna go to Jason. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. My only question for the speaker is, even if we say that voter ID will help improve things and so on, why should we not be afraid of a potential slippery slope of putting restrictions on voting in general that could very well just become you can only vote if you're a Republican?
Thank you for the question. Alex?
It sounds like the question is, how do we avoid rules that just so happen to make it more difficult for non-Republicans to vote, it sounds like?
Yeah.
So that is where the principle of building trust comes in, because it is easy to just say, oh, this will make voting more secure, and it just happens to affect only these people. So in that case, in order to build trust, people need to be constantly looking for ways to make the situation better for everyone, to make things easier for people, to give them more options, put them in better positions. So we should be making it easy for the people who find it most difficult. And if we're not doing that, then yes, I would agree that we should be, sorry, let me start that sentence over. It's not trustworthy if we're not looking for ways to help people. Does that answer your question? Or
Yeah, thank you.
That question.
Thank you to our speaker and our questioners. Moving right along, our next speaker in the negative is going to be Robin. Robin, you have up to 3 minutes. Unmute and go ahead.
Hi, I didn't plan to speak, so this is probably going to be kind of incoherent, so my apologies in advance. I've been troubled by a lot of what's happened over the last month. I was troubled by a lot of what was said during the campaigns by the Republican candidate. But primarily, I've been troubled by the fact that I don't think he's a good person. And I may be old-fashioned in that. I don't expect our leaders to be flawless by any means, but I do expect them to be men of honor or women of honor, people who try to be their best selves, people who care about the other people around them. I don't have to make a list of all the ways President Trump falls short of that. He's if someone can point me to something he's ever done that was unselfish, I'd be glad to hear it. We know by his own mouth that he thought it was great to walk up to women and grab them in their private parts. This is not a guy who's a role model. This is not a guy who's going to make decisions based on what's best for people as a whole. I just don't. And he's filled his administration with people who are similar to himself. I don't know much. I don't know a lot about Marco Rubio. Maybe he's the exception. But from everything I've read about a lot of the other people in this administration, they're not honest. They're not caring people. They haven't done a lot of service that actually served others instead of themselves. So, having spent a long time in the corporate world and with nonprofits and stuff as well, I can tell you that the leaders that I have known who were effective, who could solve big problems, who could really motivate people to come together, were not people who were selfish, and they were not people who were grabbing women by their private parts, and they were not people who were enriching themselves at every opportunity. So I think we can do better. I just think we can do better. And this last month has confirmed all my worst fears about what we were going to see in terms of the character of the people who are running this country now.
Thank you, Robin. Jazz hands for our speaker. We're gonna go to questions. Eileen, for our first question, please unmute and ask your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you. Please give thanks to the speaker for voicing what I have been feeling and crying about for the last however many months since November. I guess my question would be, how do you recommend, sorry, how would the speaker recommend overcoming that sense of supreme loss? That's what I'm feeling, both on seeing the person that has been elected and also the cruelty that has played out and the selfishness in so many of the policies. I'm not hopeless, but I wonder what the speaker might recommend how she's coping.
Thank you. What a good question. To our speaker?
I think there's a couple of things. One is that I think we can encourage the people who have more influence than each of us individually have to be their best selves, to stand up to this. I've been writing my representatives and other figures in government a lot, trying to urge them to stand pat and stick up for the vulnerable and oppose the selfishness and despicableness at every turn. The other thing I think is important is to just try and put as much good out there in the world as you can, just in your personal life. If you can, at least I try to leave things a little better than I found them, and to be nice to people and polite and get along with people okay, and you know, give a bone to a dog once in a while. That's all I can say.
Thank you to our speaker. I'm not sure I can do many of the things you all have suggested tonight, devalue the currency or set immigration law, but I can certainly leave the world a little bit better than I found it.
Oops, sorry.
No worries. For a final question for the speaker, we're going to go to Anthony. Please unmute and ask your question to me.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to express appreciation for the previous speaker's last comments regarding, doing what you can individually to make the world a better place. And I suppose that does apply to our moderator as well. Thank you. And I wanted to ask the previous speaker, though, whether she agrees that Trump's previous actions and pledge in the future to donate his entire presidential salary to charity, and indeed his actions for running for political office with no apparent financial gain and apparent obvious financial loss of opportunity in the business world might be in some ways considered selfless. I don't presuppose that that makes him a particularly good or bad person, but I'd like to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Robin?
I know that Mr. Trump did not put his assets into a blind trust the way that most previous presidents have done. And from what I know, and this I believe is has been confirmed, but maybe not. At least in the case, for example, of one of the Trump hotel properties in Washington, D.C., many foreign nationals stayed there and spent tons and tons of money for their whole entourages to take up whole suites of rooms. And that all went to the Trump holdings. And there were also a lot of contracts that were given to Ivanka, got permission from the Chinese government to sell her wares in China. Jared started his only and brand new money management fund and got money from the Saudis. So I would say that on the whole, I'm not impressed by Trump's refusal to take a salary.
Thank you to our speaker and our questioners, Jazz Hands. All right, we are nearing the end of our time together here, but we are going to try to get in a few more speeches. I'm going to go back to the affirmative and we're going to go to Rob for a speech. I'm going to give you up to 1.5 minutes. We'll see if we can get a couple more folks in as we finish off here. Give us your thoughts as quickly as you can, please. Go ahead and unmute.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. You can hear me okay? Very good. Yeah, I will make the argument in the affirmative of the resolution in that a lot of the things that the Trump team and Trump himself promised on his way to back to the White House are definitely things that are needed. I think that's why it was so effective and why he got there again. He's talking about things that make sense and that people care about. I think there is a question as to, are we getting what he said he was going to do? Are the promises that he's made really going to be kept? I think that is, I don't believe that that's the case, but that certainly will be found. But things like focusing on immigration and getting some immigration reform done absolutely has to be done. Budget and spending, getting that under control, getting us balanced, getting our debt under control has to be done. Respect on the international stage and our ability to lead is extremely important. It's part of our security. It's part of how we are in the position that we're in right now as Americans. Freedom of speech, strong economy, all those things. I'm for all those things. Full candor, I am a liberal leaning person, but I do believe those things need to be done. I don't agree with how it's being executed. I don't think the intent is to fulfill those promises. I do believe the intent is to, burn up our government and create space so they can fill it with objectives and policy positions and all those things that that there's not an easier way to undo. So, and with that, Madam Chair, I will yield.
Thank you for your speech. We're going to take one question for this speaker from John. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question to me, please.
I might, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Speaker. I would like to ask the Speaker, and maybe he answered this at the end, about whether the moves that the Trump administration has made actually is improving our relations around the world and our ability to affect positivity in the world in any way whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Rob.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And no, I absolutely don't think that we're doing the right things. I think we're losing credibility. We are changing our minds. The lack of respect that this administration has for the policies and the decisions that we've made in the past, and the not just willingness but desire to just eradicate those things and do whatever this administration thinks is the right thing now, I think is very, very dangerous. I don't know that the change could be affected as quickly without that kind of an attitude, but the actions are the wrong actions, in my opinion. I think we're doing it wrong. But I think the things that are on the table that got him back in the White House are the things that people care about and are things that absolutely need to be done. It just doesn't need to be done with a sledgehammer and a bunch of idiots swinging them. Sorry.
Thank you to our speaker and questioner. We're going to move right along with another speech. We're going to Alexandra with up to 1.5 minutes. Please go ahead and unmute and address your
Okay,
speech.
thank you, Madam Chair. So I was going to speak on a lot of other things that have been covered, so I'll just keep it to the one that hasn't really been covered, which is climate change. This is a really important issue. Since Trump has taken office, he's taken us out of the Paris Climate Accord again. He's declared a national energy emergency and doubled down on drilling more oil and gas, and he's revoked the Biden EV goals. I think all of these are catastrophic. Climate change, we can all see it. It's happening. It's not in doubt like it was, 5 or 10 years ago. All of the storms, all of the wildfires, it scares me. I've got kids. I want to see them. People are talking about the deficit threatening our kids and grandkids. This is the biggest threat to our kids and grandkids, and we need to do something about it. And Biden's Inflation Reduction Act has been a huge game changer. I'm involved in lots of climate renewable energy projects in my neck of the woods, and the Inflation Reduction Act has been hugely positive, and it really saddens me to see what Trump is doing and scares me. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Jazz hands for our speaker. We'll take one question from Carol. Go ahead and unmute.
Madam Chair, first of all, I would like to thank the speaker for raising what I think is the most important issue facing us. I think I'm not supposed to talk about what I think. I just am going to ask, can we continue to have a lively political culture if we're living on an earth that can no longer support us?
Alexandra, do you care to respond?
Yeah, I think it's a rhetorical question. To me, this is, I disagree with Trump on just about everything, but this is the one. I don't understand how this has gotten pegged as a blue issue. To me, it's a survival issue. Republicans have grandkids too. I just don't understand how people can't see the urgency. And we have the technology. We can do it. We absolutely, we have electric cars here at my house. We have solar panels. We have mini splits. It's great. And we have the political will. We can do it. Just like they did the New Deal. The Green New Deal seems to be a politically negative thing, but we could create a lot of jobs, and we could make this transition, and life would be good. So I would love to be part of a Braver Angels debate on climate change. I don't know if there has been one, but.
Thank you to our speaker and questioner. Maybe one of those coming up. All right. We are running out of time here, and there are so many people left who have so much to say. We are going to do one final speed round, if you will. I'm going to give one person in the affirmative up to 1 minute to speak, same to the person in the negative. We won't go ahead and take questions, and we'll move from there into our debrief. So hang on with us and hear out these last folks. We're going to Joshua in the affirmative. You have up to 1 minute. Do you want to unmute and go ahead? Joshua, are you still with us? It looks like he's not. Well, in that case, we'll actually just conclude there. We'll leave it there and go ahead to move to our debrief. Must be a sign. Okay, with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.